I was comparing registry scanners when her message popped up. A blue bubble so ordinary it felt like a trick. Wedding's still on, but I'm spending the last few nights before with my ex for closure. I stared at the phone as if the screen might apologize. The apartment hummed with the dishwasher and the building's old radiator. Outside, a city bus sighed at the curb. I typed, "Do what you need to do," and hit send, because anger would make a mess and silence would make a point. The bubble traveled into space, tiny and polite, while my chest turned cold. We'd chosen a Saturday in June, a barn venue, an hour outside the city with string lights, and a pond that looked like a postcard. Her mother had cried happy tears on the tour. My father, who never cried, had asked about parking like it mattered more than love. We were close enough to the big day that the caterer had our final count. The florist had our color scheme, and I had memorized a signature for thank you notes. I had believed in us the way kids believe playground swings can launch them into orbit if they pump hard enough. She followed with a heart emoji and a "you're the best." I didn't answer. I read the thread again from the beginning, all those months of planning and goofy photos and late-night I love yous. They sat there like suddenly outdated coupons. I set the phone down and looked around our place. The couch we'd haggled for, the framed national parks posters we'd collected on trips, the stack of favors we'd assembled, little jars of local honey with tags tied just so. The apartment felt staged, like a model unit you tour before the real thing, attractive but not lived in. I called the venue first because that was the heaviest lever. The manager, a calm woman named Rhonda who had guided us through tasting menus and rain plans, answered on the second ring. I told her there had been a change. She paused long enough for me to hear spreadsheets rustling in her mind. Then she said the policy allowed a cancellation, though the deposit was gone. I said I understood. She promised to confirm with an email. Her tone stayed warm and professional, like she was canceling a conference instead of dreams. Next came the caterer, the DJ, the shuttle service, the officiant we'd chosen because he'd promised to keep things light. Everyone reacted with the same practical compassion. I listened, gave them the go-ahead, and moved down the list. Each call put another inch between my life that morning and the one I had by lunch. I kept my voice steady. I wanted the people on the other end to think I was the kind of person who took care of things. When the last call ended, I walked to the window and watched the traffic. The city carried on as if there weren't centerpieces sobbing somewhere. I made coffee even though it was late. The mug warmed my hands, but the feeling didn't climb any higher. The future I'd pictured, our first dance, the corny toast, the way she'd squeeze my fingers when we looked out over a room full of people we loved, was already drifting out of reach like a parade balloon slipping its tether. That night, I didn't sleep. I played the old highlights on a loop. The way she laughed the first time we tried to make pancakes together and turned the kitchen into a flower storm. The Lost in the Rain walk where we found a diner and drank hot chocolate. The way she convinced me to adopt a plant we named Captain Fern. None of it matched the text. Closure? That word belonged to pop psychology podcasts and movies we rolled our eyes at. It didn't belong in the week before vows. In the morning, I sent a simple note to my parents and sister saying plans had changed and I'd explain later. My sister called immediately. I let it go to voicemail and listened to her message. Soft, worried, nothing pushy. I promised myself I'd call back once my thoughts turned from fog to sentences. She didn't text again that day. Her silence told its own story. In the evening, I scrolled our photos and stopped. At one from last fall, both of us in sweaters at an orchard, her cheeks red from wind, my arm around her waist. I remembered the sweet tartness of the apples and the way she'd said next year we'll bring our kids here. I closed the album and put the phone face down, then flipped it back because I didn't want to look like I was hiding from it. On the second day, boxes began to arrive. Gifts from people who'd waited until the last minute. I stacked them by the door, still sealed, because opening them felt like stealing. A heavy one from my uncle tilted the pile. I slid it to the floor and steadied the rest. The honey favors sat nearby with their cheerful tags. Bees on the labels buzzed at me like cheerful referees. In the afternoon, her mother called. I answered because I didn't want the situation to morph into a wildfire of guessing. She sounded winded, like she'd taken stairs too fast. She asked if everything was all right because she'd received a message from the venue with the subject line event cancellation and couldn't make sense of it. I told her it was true. I didn't say why. I didn't throw her daughter under a bus. She asked if we were fighting, and I said we were working through something which was both true and evasive. She cried, apologized for calling, and asked me to take care of myself. I said I would. That evening, I received a text from one of the groomsmen asking about the rehearsal dinner. I told him there wouldn't be one. He typed, then stopped, then typed, then wrote, "I'm here if you want to talk." I stared at the blinking dots and realized how much of adulthood is people trying not to push while hoping you'll let them in. On the third day, her maid of honor, Sophie, sharp as a tack and loyal like a guard dog, sent a group text reminding everyone of the bachelorette party location, a rooftop bar with a view of downtown. The thread filled with glittery excitement and bikini emojis. No one had looped me in on the bachelor plans because my friends and I had chosen quiet, barbecue, and a backyard fire. Sophie added a note about leaving phones in bags and living in the moment. It read like a suggestion and a warning. That night, Captain Fern drooped. I watered the soil and rotated the pot to the window as if the plant had simply been facing the wrong way. I told myself that giving care to something still growing might anchor me. I told myself a lot of things. Mostly I waited for a call from her, a call from anyone. The quiet stretched and then settled. On the fourth day, the venue followed up with a confirmation of cancellation and a kind paragraph about how love journeys sometimes change course. They wished us well and noted the date would now be available to another couple. I pictured strangers dancing under the lights we'd chosen and felt an unexpected relief. At least somebody would use that space. It was better than imagining the barn sitting empty, listening for vows that never came. That evening I walked through our neighborhood and ended up at the park where we'd picnicked the day we chose our playlist. A group of kids played pickup basketball on a cracked court, and a golden retriever tried to join them. The sun slid down behind a church steeple. I sat on a bench and let the breeze pull at my shirt. I composed speeches in my head, dignified, balanced, almost cheerful. None of them sounded like me. The bachelorette party landed on a Friday. I knew it because Sophie posted a countdown on social media 2 weeks earlier. Glitter letters, champagne flutes, a promise of stories. My phone buzzed near sunset with a photo of the skyline from the rooftop bar, sent by a mutual friend who assumed I was also out celebrating. The message included, "Can you believe it's finally here?" And I could, just not in the way she meant. I was back in the apartment when the call came. It was the venue, and Rhonda's calm voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. A careful tone used by people delivering news to a person. Standing near a cliff. She said the bride had phoned them from her party, excited, asking about a last-minute detail, and that they had informed her the event had been canceled by the groom earlier in the week. She said the bride seemed confused at first, then quiet. She asked if I was safe, if I needed anything. It was such a kind question, and it made something in me wobble. After we hung up, the texts started. Not from her, still nothing, but from guests who'd received notifications from vendors processing refunds or travel changes. My phone buzzed like a wasp nest. I placed it on the counter and let it vibrate against the granite until the noise became a dull rattle. I brewed tea and watched steam lift like smoke signals. Around 9, Sophie called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I answered. Her voice was all business at first, clipped and controlled, like a lawyer in a small claims courtroom. She asked what was happening, why the venue was telling the bride a story she'd never heard. I said I'd canceled. She asked why. I said because of the message I'd received. She went silent long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said very quietly that the bride had used a word people throw around without realizing how it lands. She said it didn't excuse anything, but context mattered. I told her context had been in short supply. She asked if we could meet in person. I said no, not tonight. I didn't want to sit across from anyone and explain a feeling that didn't fit into bullet points. She told me the rooftop had gone from sparkle to storm, that there had been tears and raised voices and someone knocking over a tray of nachos. She said the bride had walked out without saying where she was going. I waited for her to ask me to look for her. She didn't. She said she hoped we all handled things with as much care as we could find. Then she hung up. I sat in the dark and listened to the city through the window. The rush of cars, a distant siren, laughter floating up like confetti that never falls. In the corner, the stack of gifts glowed faintly in the streetlight. Captain Fern stood a little taller. I thought about the word closure, about doors and clicks and final turns of a key. I had canceled the ceremony, but not the story. The story was very much underway, and though I had no script, I had a quiet resolve. I would answer truthfully when asked, and I would not chase someone who chose to walk toward an old chapter. Near midnight, the door finally opened. She stood in the frame, hair pinned up with tiny pearls from a party kit, eyes tired, makeup smudged from crying or heat or both. She didn't step inside. She held her phone like a passport and said my name slowly, like she needed to make sure I was real. I waited. She didn't launch into explanations. She didn't shout. She asked a single question, almost gentle. Why did you do it without talking to me first? I looked at the person I'd planned to marry and understood that the rest of the night would determine whether we could speak to each other as people, not positions. I told her it deserved a conversation, and that we could have one now, calmly, honestly, with the same care we promised the day we picked our vows. She nodded, finally crossed the threshold, and closed the door behind her. The click sounded like the first sentence of a new chapter, one that neither of us expected to read. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tight like she was holding a small fragile thing that might escape if she moved too fast. The streetlight through the blinds carved stripes across her dress. I sat across from her, the distance between us filled with everything that used to be easy, jokes, shared glances, the small rhythm of love that had felt indestructible. I meant what I said, she began. The wedding is still on. I just needed closure to make sure I wasn't carrying anything unresolved into our marriage. Her words were careful, practiced, like she'd been rehearsing them on the ride over. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she saw that I wasn't jumping in, she hurried on. He reached out, she said. My ex said he wanted to apologize for how he left things. It messed with my head more than I expected. I didn't want to start our life with ghosts whispering in my ear. I nodded slowly. And you thought the best way to do that was to spend nights with him? It wasn't like that, she said quickly. We just talked. I swear, that's all it was. I looked down at my hands. Then why not tell me first? She exhaled hard, as if I'd asked her to lift something heavy. Because you'd have said no. You're right, I said. I would have. She blinked, startled by my honesty. I stood and walked to the kitchen, poured water, and came back without drinking it. Do you know what it's like, I asked, to plan a life with someone and then read that message? To have to imagine what closure means while the person you love disappears into silence. Tears gathered in her eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said quietly. You didn't just cross a line. You redrew it and forgot to tell me where it went. For a while, neither of us spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room. Then she whispered, Why did you cancel everything before we talked? I took a deep breath. Because when I got that text, it felt like the wedding had already been canceled. You just hadn't realized it yet. The words were enough. She covered her face with her hands. Everyone found out tonight. My friends, my family. They all think I cheated. I didn't say that, I replied, but you have to admit it doesn't look great. Her voice cracked. Do you hate me? I hesitated. No, I don't hate you. I just don't know who I'm talking to anymore. She wiped her eyes and looked around the room, at the favors, the boxes, the half-packed honeymoon suitcase. I wanted to make sure I was ready to commit, she said softly. I just went about it in the worst possible way. That's one way to put it, I said. The thing is, commitment isn't about being sure before you start. It's about choosing to stay when things get uncertain. You chose to test something that wasn't broken. She stood and walked toward the window. I ruined everything. I didn't argue. I couldn't. She was right. After a long silence, she turned back. Can we fix this? Is there any way to start over? I looked at her, at the woman I'd planned to marry, the one who had once felt like home. My heart wanted to say yes. My mind whispered no. I don't know, I said honestly. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I need time. She nodded slowly, accepting the verdict like a sentence she saw coming. I'll go, she murmured. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt both bigger and smaller. I sat there until dawn, listening to the city wake up. I didn't cry. I just felt hollow, like someone had erased the future and left the outline behind. Days passed. Friends reached out, some out of sympathy, some out of curiosity. I told them only that the wedding was off. Rumors filled the rest. My sister visited with takeout and silence. She didn't ask questions, just handed me food and watched old comedies until laughter found its way back into the room. Her family called too. Her mother apologizing again, her father trying to be diplomatic. I reassured them that I wasn't angry, though that wasn't quite true. Anger had burned out, leaving behind something quieter and sharper: disappointment. A week later, a small envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a letter in her handwriting. She wrote that she'd ended contact with her ex completely, that she was going to therapy, that she wanted to understand why she'd risk something good for a ghost. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but hoped I'd find peace. I read it twice and set it aside. I didn't reply, not yet. Some wounds need silence before they need closure. That night, I took a drive to the barn venue. The new couple who had booked our date were there touring, laughing, imagining their own future. I parked far enough away that they wouldn't see me. The fairy lights were already strung, twinkling like the night sky I'd once pictured us dancing under. It didn't hurt the way I expected. Instead, there was a strange calm, a sense that life keeps moving even when you stop to catch your breath. As I drove home, the city lights blurred in the rain. I thought about her text, the one that had changed everything. Maybe closure wasn't something you got from another person. Maybe it was the quiet acceptance that the story didn't end the way you'd planned, but you survived it anyway. When I got home, Captain Fern stood tall, greener than ever. I smiled at the stubborn plant and whispered, "We're still standing." The phone buzzed once, her name on the screen. I let it ring, then fade. Some endings don't need words. Some answers live in the silence that follows. Weeks drifted by quietly, each one softer than the last. The world didn't end, though it had felt that way at first. I learned how to live without checking my phone every few minutes, how to cook for one without feeling the empty chair like an accusation. The pain didn't vanish. It simply settled into a quiet corner, something I could nod at without flinching. The wedding date arrived on a clear Saturday morning. I woke up early, out of habit, the sunlight cutting through the blinds just as it would have on our big day. Instead of putting on a suit, I brewed coffee and sat by the window. Somewhere out there, guests who hadn't checked their messages were probably realizing there was no ceremony. The thought stung, but it didn't break me. Around noon, I drove to the coast. The ocean had always been our reset button, the place we went when life got too loud. I walked along the sand with my shoes in hand, the wind tangling my hair, gulls crying above. For the first time, I didn't picture her beside me. I just felt the peace of being alone and whole. That night, I posted a short message online. It said, "Sometimes love teaches you what you won't accept, not what you'll keep. I wish her peace. I'll find mine." I didn't expect a response, but messages poured in. Friends, strangers, people who'd been through their own versions of heartbreak. They told me I'd done the right thing. I didn't need validation, but it felt good to know that dignity still counted for something. A few days later, I ran into Sophie at a coffee shop. She hesitated before walking over, guilt written across her face. "She's moving out of town," she said. "Wants to start fresh. She said she hopes you do too." I thanked her, genuinely. "I already have," I said, and for the first time I meant it. Months passed. I picked up new habits, morning runs, volunteering at a local shelter, weekend hikes. Life began to fill in the spaces she'd left behind. Every now and then, I'd remember her laugh or the way she hummed when she cooked, but the memories no longer hurt. They were just echoes from another chapter. One evening, I got a letter from Rhonda, the venue manager. She wrote that the new couple who took our date had sent a thank you note for making their dream possible. She added a small postscript. "Sometimes cancellation is just a redirection." I smiled at that. She was right. What had felt like an ending was really a turning point. A year later, I attended a friend's wedding at a different venue. The lights shimmered, the music played, and the air was full of joy that didn't ache. I danced, laughed, and felt something new blooming where the old hurt had been, a quiet readiness to believe again. As the night ended, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The sky was wide and full of stars. I thought about how closure isn't something you chase. It's something that arrives quietly when you finally stop looking back. I walked to my car, the sound of music fading behind me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't replaying the past or imagining what could have been. I was simply there, in the present, alive and free. And that was enough. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life twists like this, don't forget to leave a comment. What would you have done if you got that message before your wedding? Would you have called it off or tried to talk it out? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. And if you like the story, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story filled with love, lessons, and a little bit of poetic revenge. Thanks for watching. Your support means the world.